Welcome to Perspectives of Interfaith. My name is Zarina Shakir, and I will be your host for the program today. And we have a program that you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with interfaith? But let me just say that what we're going to be discussing really, I would think, gets to the heart of how we are living in America, looking at certain things that occur that we don't really give a lot of thought about. It's called food, one of them, one of the things that we'll be talking about. Our guests are from the USDA, or were with the USDA. My first guest to the furthest left of me is Mr. Lawrence Lucas, and he was with the USDA, so he is now called the Shadow President and President Emeritus of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. He's originally from Washington, D.C., and we have a lot of things that we want to speak about. I'm learning some things about the USDA that I did not know, that they are involved with pretty much everything in every county in the United States, everything. So you may learn something with this particular show today. Our other guest is Yaida Ford, and she is the managing partner at the Ford Law Firm PLLC. I don't think I've heard of the PLLC, so we'll find out what that is. It's located in Washington, D.C., and she's originally from another Washington. She's from Vancouver, Washington, a graduate of Denison University, and she is one of the, I guess, lead counsels that was dealing with the firefighters situation in the state of Washington. And you may be wondering, what does the USDA have to do with firefighters? Well, again, we have a lot to learn on this particular program today. So, Mr. Lucas, and do you mind, should I call you by your first names or your
whatever you prefer.
Okay, so Mr. Lucas, I would like to ask you, give us a little thumbnail sketch of the USDA and what we should know about it, because before I have you to answer the question, all I think about with USDA is the Department of Agriculture and maybe some crops, things that are growing in the United States, and the former food stamp program, which is now called SNAP. And that to me is pretty much all I know. So tell us more.
Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is involved in every segment of our life and every day throughout this country. The USDA was formulated with the desires of President Roosevelt. And in so doing, it is involved even at one time, the airplane security in airports. People didn't know that.
The
food
traffic
stamp
controllers?
programs, not the traffic controllers, but in other words, the security. When you go through the lines,
Like the TSA?
and that was USDA.
Okay.
Also, the food that comes in the country, they have inspectors there to inspect the food and stop food from coming in that should not come in, and food that's not supposed to go out. In addition to that, they're involved in housing. They're involved with the firefighters and the Forest Service throughout this country, and we all know what's going on in the West, and agriculture is involved in that. We deal with housing in rural America. We are involved with electric programs that will give rural America an opportunity to get electricity at low cost instead of depending on big companies like PSE&G and Potomac and Electric and Power. So USDA is involved in every aspect of American living. And that's the way it was formulated in the beginning, and it has expanded since then.
How did the USDA get all of these particular areas under their umbrella? How, I don't get the firefighters, I don't get the electric, USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
As the organization grew, the politics of the day brought it to the Congress control where organizations and things fit in their communities. And they made sure that many things that involved them in rural America, they made sure that the U.S. Department of Agriculture became involved and administered those programs and made sure those programs worked in order to make life less miserable and better for rural America. And you'll notice I use the term rural America and not urban America.
Okay, so we here know what the difference is in rural and urban, but are you working with the urban areas of America also?
Well, as president of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees, which came about in 1994, and I was the first president, we are involved with making sure that in the case of discrimination cases against the disabled, against elderly, against those people that may suffer from discrimination because of their gender or sex, as well as employment discrimination. But it also includes discrimination in Title VI, which involves farmers, minority farmers, Native American farmers, black farmers. Some people think that because of the recent lawsuits, for a while there, that the only complaints that fell under the Department of Agriculture were those of black farmers. But women farmers have benefited from it, Native American farmers, and my good friend Lupe Garcia, who passed a few months ago, filed the first major class action for Hispanics, and he lived in New Mexico. So that's the Congress and the congressional leaders from the districts made sure that those kinds of programs ended up in places where they could control it.
Okay, so before I get to you, Yaida, or Ms. Ford, I did want to ask Mr. Lucas a couple of other quick questions that are dealing with not just USDA, but as I'm thinking about it, is it as if the Congress or the government decided to just throw everything under USDA that doesn't have anything to do with HUD or education or the Department of Commerce or all the other agencies that actually exist with the U.S. government?
Well, as I indicated, the congressional people got together and they cut up the pie.
Okay.
And they figured out what would work best for them. And they negotiated. They actually negotiated what was going to go where. And that the history of that in terms of how it happened, I do not know for a fact of how it happened. But that's what happens when the Congress, they look at certain programs like you say, well, if you talk about rural, you talk about housing, but USDA deals with primarily rural housing. And you had HUD that deal with urban housing.
I see.
So that's that's a good comparison where things are placed one place for a reason and another place for another reason.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, that gives me a little better understanding of that. So, Yaida, tell us how you got involved. Well, let's do a little background with you on your going to Howard Law School, yes, and the idea, when you were younger, this is a question I'd like to ask people. When you were younger, did you want to be an attorney? And if so, what type?
I will say I didn't know. My mom wanted me to be a doctor. She used to page me around the house, paging Dr. Yaida Ford. It wasn't until my senior year in undergrad, maybe earlier than that, maybe my sophomore year, when I was at Denison University and I read the case of Dred Scott. And that was when I knew I wanted to go to law school. Younger than that, I think when I first saw the movie Separate But Equal with Sidney Poitier, and I just remember the scene with the doll, and they were asking, the young little black girl, what she thought about the black doll versus the white doll, and which doll was pretty and which doll was smart, and she was picking the white doll. And that had some impact. That's my earliest memory of the law having an impact on me as a child. I can't say that I wanted to be a lawyer in that moment. I didn't really understand what that was. I was about 7 or 8 when I watched the film for the first time. But certainly reading Dred Scott and having to make a career decision, that case definitely helped me cement the decision to go to law school.
Well, you're from Vancouver, Washington. What kind of problems are they having, let's say, in Vancouver? I mean, we do know now about firefighting and that the fire line has gone from California all the way up, I guess, up towards
Yes.
Canada.
Yes.
But Vancouver, Washington, I think of that as being a very nice place, just like Vancouver, Canada. So what was it like growing up there?
Well, Vancouver is very beautiful. I appreciate it now as an adult. I mean, as a kid, I mean, I was one of 3, Black people there, and there wasn't a lot of cool places to hang out, and the mall. You couldn't, in DC, public transportation makes life so much easier, but there you didn't really have that. But my father is a forester, and he was a USDA. As a matter of fact, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service for it's now 43 years, and so that is basically what dictated every move in our family. If Dad got a promotion or another job, we were moving, and it was always going to be near a national forest. So we lived in Puerto Rico. He worked on the El Yunque Forest there, and in Vancouver, Washington, he worked for the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. Little did I know at that time that I would be an attorney representing USDA employees, Forest Service employees, rather, with discrimination claims. I never knew that. I mean, never. There was no aspiration in my house. We had no discussion around the dinner table. It was not anything that was planned.
It was already in your DNA, though.
It was.
Okay.
It
and
was.
you didn't know that.
I had no idea that,
there
that
it
God
is.
was going to send me. This is the interfaith show. Had no idea that God was going to send me in that direction, but I totally believe that now.
And as I'm thinking about what you are involved with, what is it like actually being an attorney around these kind of issues? Because let me at least say to our audience, your area is also condominium rights. Let me see, estate planning and civil rights litigation. I can see maybe where it might overlap a bit, but before we really talk about the fire aspect, condominium rights, I mean, I think of, let's say, tenant and landlords. So, and I've been involved with a situation in my past to have to deal with something like that. So how do you go from condominium rights and real estate planning and the civil rights I can get, to fire?
It's advocacy.
Okay.
And fighting for people and interests.
Okay.
And in the condominium and HOA setting, that's where people live. And people are very sensitive about issues that arise in their home and around their home and in their communities. And so I represent both. I often represent unit owners as well who have an issue with there's either a threat in their community or the condominium or the board is making some decision that has a negative impact on them. And so you have to have the advocate's voice. And so that's what connects I guess my passion for what I do with the condominium clients with the plaintiffs in the employment side. The two areas technically have nothing to do with each other,
Okay.
but the connection again is just the sense of justice and what arouses my sense of justice.
Okay.
And I just hate to see people who feel like they have no voice.
And that's one of the things that I would like to say about our program, besides the one sentence that I usually say at the beginning of the show, which I didn't. We try to dispel the myths and stereotypes of various faith traditions. Well, the same thing I think applies when you're speaking for the voiceless. They have voices, no doubt, but they're not being heard.
That's right.
And that's truly something
That's right.
that is happening in our society, even more now with this election coming up. And we can talk more about some of that also. Do you work, Yaida, with tenants with rent control and things like that also? And does that fall under the rubric of condominium?
Yes,
Okay.
and sometimes not. I mean, sometimes because it's so related. I mean, in the cases where unit owners are renting their units out, I mean, it just kind of falls in there. And because we're in DC, and we do just so much work in the real estate realm. The landlord-tenant piece is a part of that. And so we advocate, I've advocated for both landlords and tenants. And in DC, it's really hard to be a landlord, but and sometimes, you know, on the tenant side of it, again, the tenant feels like they have no voice. My landlord isn't hearing me. And the only way sometimes that the tenant can get a landlord's attention is by going to court. And thankfully in DC, there is an affirmative conditions court where if there are housing conditions that the tenant wants to challenge, they can go to court. Now that didn't exist. That's a very new creature.
And what is that again?
It's called affirmative conditions court. And if a tenant wants to challenge a landlord regarding the conditions in their apartment or their basement, wherever they're renting, they can bring a claim for that and try to get the landlord's attention. It used to be that before this court existed, tenants would try to withhold rent. Now, if you do that, the landlord is always going to sue to evict you based on non-payment of rent. But at least that would get the tenant in the door. If they withhold the rent and the landlord brings the lawsuit, now the tenant is before the court and can say, Judge, this is why I'm withholding my rent. These are the conditions in my apartment. And photographs documenting all of that, because some of these conditions are just egregious.
Deplorable,
They're deplorable.
Yeah.
And it's within the landlord's control to fix. And some people just
So
don't.
is that when we call them a slumlord?
Yeah, a slumlord or just a lazy lord. I mean, sometimes they're just lazy and they just don't want to take the time, or they don't want to spend the money
I see.
on it, and they'll send somebody to patch up or do whatever versus hiring a professional to come in
I see.
and fix the problems that are in the unit.
So before we get back to USDA itself, do you deal with anything around regentrification?
No, we don't. Like urban planning or urban development.
Yeah.
No, we
And
don't. do
well,
anything with that.
what about people who are losing their property because the environment is changing, and the person says, "I don't want to sell my house. I just don't want to move." And see, when I'm a little older than you, I seem to remember there was something called urban renewal, and what we call it now is urban removal.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But I mean, when I was in school, in college, and we were studying the, urban planning and things, and that was not my area, but there were certain classes that I took just for some familiarity and understanding, and I'm glad that I did. When you're producing and hosting a show, there are a lot of things that you really want to know or should know. Right. And so regentrification just seems to be on the lips of everyone around America. And you're not working in that area.
Yeah, no, I mean, not directly. So, but I live and work in DC, and I see it, and it impacts me because the part of the city that I live in Ward 8, is undergoing rapid gentrification right now. So it does affect, and I live in a condominium, which is actually one of the ways I started. And so everything that's happening around the community is affecting us. It affects property values, and whether people want to move out or stay and hold on and watch their property value increase. Because when the recession hit, particularly in DC, and this is when our practice really started booming, people started walking away from their condominiums because they just couldn't afford the mortgage. The thing was underwater, and people couldn't afford the condo fee, so they were just walking away. And now, so you have these buildings and these communities with a lot of vacant properties.
Really?
And they're in areas that are gentrifying. And so people that are living in buildings where there are like 10 vacant units or whatever are saying, should I hold on to my unit? Because now the change is coming. We're seeing change in the community. They're building a Walmart here. Now there's a Busboys and Poets down the corner or around the corner or whatever. And so you just, there's a cognitive dissonance living in the middle of urban removal, because on the one hand, when you live in the community, you want to see these changes because you want to be the beneficiary of them.
Yes.
You don't want to be pushed out, and then they're making room for the new people to come in and enjoy what you won't get a chance to. So it's very. I live in the middle of it, and it's very difficult.
And
to watch.
I just might say that or ask the question, why do people go into condominiums as opposed to buying a house? You're buying the apartment. To me, it's an apartment, so to speak. Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
I'm actually glad you asked that because the Fair Housing Administration was a big part of this. And condominiums are supposed to be an affordable way for Americans to achieve some type of home ownership. it was really designed for people of color and people with moderate incomes to own something without having the responsibility of taking care of a whole house, you know, the yard, the basement, the whatever. When you have a community or a homeowners association, the association is responsible for some of the bigger things, like who picks up the trash in the back,
right.
who makes sure the parking lot is lit, who makes sure that the elevator works if it's a building with an elevator, the security cameras. That's the association. That's what the condo fees pay for. And there are owners, and then there are just people like me who are young and moving into an urban environment, and wanting affordable housing, and condominiums were designed to do that, especially when the Fair Housing Administration started this movement. But two, there's also the homeownership aspect where you don't want a yard.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to mow lawns.
Right,
I don't
right.
want to rake leaves. And the condominium gives you that convenience.
Right.
But on the flip side, you are neighbors, very friendly neighbors with the people in your community. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. So you kind of, there are pros and cons to being in a common interest community.
Gotcha. Last question to you right at the moment. Why then did Fair Housing not look at where they were building what became projects to being condominiums where people were owning the property instead of just renting or living there, and then things went down, down, down?
You know, I don't want to speak on the assumption, but I am making somewhat of an assumption. Part of it may have been where the demand is. For some of the condominiums in DC now, there are Hope 6 projects. I don't know if you've heard of Hope 6, but
Explain to us what
so
that is.
some of the condominium developments in these urban areas there's like a deal with the housing authority in that city where the condominium will say, or the developer, whoever's going to buy an old housing project, he'll say, I will buy this housing project, I will turn it into condominiums, make it livable, I'll make it affordable, and I'll designate a certain percentage to go to low income or moderate income
Mixed
folks. So it's like a mixed
right.
income community,
Right.
and it works. I mean, there are models all over the country, and DC has several models. So that was designed to meet part of this issue of you have a working class, you have this working poor, and in DC and cities like DC where cost of living is so high that people who work every day 40, 50 hours a week would never have a chance to own a house or live in a decent community. The answer was a Hope 6 project, where an old project, if you will take it, a developer will take it, invest in it, develop it, and allow people that would really never otherwise be able to own, to live in a community with people who are
More upscale.
upscale income, and let's see how these as neighbors they interact and mix, and it does work well. There are some challenges, of course. But for the most part, it works.
Okay.
Where it's been tried.
Got you. Mr. Lucas, we haven't forgotten about you. So let me just say or ask the question, and we're getting ready to go into a break in a moment. What is the difference, or what is it, okay, where you've got rural housing? Are they building condominiums in the rural areas, or are we talking about houses, apartments, townhouses? What?
Aida probably is better versed in answering that question than I
Okay.
am. My expertise is primarily in the area of civil and human rights
Okay.
and discrimination. But I could not answer that question because I'm not involved in the
I
housing aspect of the
Okay.
U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Okay, so we will come back to that. But when we come back off of our break, then I would like to speak with you both more about some of the litigation and the issues that have taken place, or the situations and challenges that people have been confronted with, like the black farmers and some of the name calling and things like that, that I'm just, can I say, appalled? But it's more than that. So we'll be back in a moment. We just want to say that you are watching Perspectives of Interfaith Television. And our guests here today are attorney Yaida Ford and Mr. Lawrence Lucas, who is the shadow president. I'm trying to figure out who are you shadowing with the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. We'll be back in a moment. Please join us.
I'm Talia. As the mother of 2 young children, there is nothing closer to my heart than the health of our babies. That's why I'm asking you to help put an end to premature birth. Each year, more than 15 million babies are born too soon, and more than 1 million will die. Visit facebook.com/World Prematurity Day to find out how you can make a difference in your community and around the world.
Welcome back to Perspectives of Interfaith Television. My name is Zarina Shakir, and today we are speaking to 2 people who have had involvement, work, advocacy with, well, not for the USDA, but for people that have been, can I say, dealt with in a very unjust way. And we are trying to hear more about what actually has happened with the USDA. To my immediate left is Yaida Ford, who's an attorney, has her own firm in Washington, D.C. And next to her is Lawrence Lucas, who is, I keep wanting to make fun of the shadow president, but the president emeritus also of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. Explain to us what that job entailed, and is that a paid job, or were you just doing this because out of the goodness of your heart?
Well, what happened was it was probably more of an accident that they selected me for the position.
And who was they?
And
Who
they,
were they?
meaning a group of African Americans, came together in 1994, late 1993, and formed the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. And that was done because we were still having problems of discrimination against employees. And I was hearing a little bit about the discrimination against black farmers at the time. But I became president because many employees, African Americans, were having problems with job discrimination. We had cases of racial epithet in the workplace, and we were bothered about that because it was during the Clinton administration, and we had a black Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Espy, and we thought that we needed to formulate an organization that would bring to the attention of Secretary Espy and an organization that had a base strong enough and broad enough that it would give and advise the Secretary as to what he could do about the discrimination. Although the organization started as an African American organization, and 1 to 2 years later, I saw a need to include all and be more inclusive for many different reasons. For acceptability, for our performance and identifying the broad issues that not only concern that of African Americans, but also persons with different sexual orientation, the disabled, older Americans, women who were being abused in the workplace because of their jobs and the insults that occurred. But one of the most important things to us was that we were hearing cases of racial epithet in the workplace, and that was something that bothered me personally, and we took an aggressive role in making sure that the secretary knew about these things and made sure he wanted to do something about it. That's the way the organization came into being.
I see. Now, these racial epithets that were being voiced, who was doing this and to whom?
Well, our experience was that we were getting employees telling us about hangman's noose in the workplace. We were hearing about people being called nigger in the workplace. We soon found out later on someone had scribbled on, we thought one, but I found another in both the administration where the secretary is, in one of their bathrooms, and as in one of the other facilities across the street, they had NAACP, now apes are called people. That'll give you an idea of the kind of racial epithet that was going on. But the hangman's nooses, and then people being called you people. In one case in 2009, which was later on, a doctor in an Iowa research lab at USDA was given an award. And in that award was given a monkey doll. And in conjunction with that, they gave him a hangman's noose along with it.
Wait a minute. He was receiving an award and they gave him this doll?
That's
this
correct.
monkey?
And
Okay.
of course, that he was taken aback because we had heard about in 2009, we were hearing about how the president was called monkey. And so the monkey issue was really something that we really were looking at, but we never thought it would pop up in the workplace as an award. Two of the individuals that received this racial epithet, one was so afraid that he didn't even file a complaint. And that's how things are in the federal government. And that's how things are going on in the federal government, inside and outside, still against black farmers. Because many people think that on the issue of the black farmer, they think that, well, we've had all these cases that have been settled under this, under the black president, under the Obama administration. But cases are being filed and are continuing to be filed, and black farmers, as well as USDA employees, are suffering egregious acts of discrimination at the U.S. Department of Agriculture under this administration.
Under this administration. Can you tell us, let's say, I'm not sure if you've got the statistics, but let's say 100 years ago, how many black farmers or how much land was actually owned by black people, and where we are today?
We owned 1 million acres at the turn of the century.
1 million
In 1970, we had 53,000 acres left, and we are down to a very small amount. And the key is this: this was all done by design. They have in rural America a thing called the county committee system, which is under which is formulated as part of the Department of Agriculture to make sure that the money that's fed into these counties in rural America, to make sure that the money is being used, but it's supposed to go to everyone. Black farmers sometimes were told that there was no money available. Sometimes they got the money in September instead of March or April. You can't farm with money in August and September. And sometimes they never got it at all. And in some cases, they were told to get out of their offices and don't come back. So this has been going on, and that brought about the class action of Pigfoot. But you also have this egregious behavior going on inside of USDA, even to this day, and people are being discriminated against, and you have a women's class action in the Forest Service.
Yep.
And let me just cite some of the examples later on about what happened to some of those women.
Okay, but well, before we get to the women, and I know that Yaida Ford, you were a part of that particular case, those cases. I would like you to speak briefly about the Pigfoot case and what that was all about.
The Pigfoot case was filed which was settled and filed in 1997.
Okay.
And it went back to 1980 because what they had done was thousands of cases that were filed by black farmers who were able to file the case at all. And we're talking about maybe hundreds, if not thousands, that never even got on the books. Right. And the farmers got together and they found out by communicating with each other, they found out by meeting and having demonstrations in one state, they found out that this was going on in all of primarily the southern region. And then the farmers got together as an organization, and John Boyd, along with a group of farmers from Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, all over the southern region, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, got together and formed the National Black Farmers Association. And that's when the farmers began to come to Washington, and I participated in one of the first demonstrations in front of the White House, talking about how the Clinton administration needed to do something and fix the discrimination that's going on against black farmers. And that case did prevail, and $1.2 billion were given out about 4 years ago to settle Pickford 1. But there was a Pickford 2, which was the Brewington part, which was part 2, because there were thousands of farmers who weren't even notified. And I think out of the 100,000 farmers that applied for that money of $50,000, as in the same case of some of the settlements in Pickford 1, they about 17,000 prevailed and got paid last year additional $50,000, which came to $1.25 billion of the taxpayers' money. And I use this word taxpayers' money. You have people in the government that's denying people the right to programs and services. And the people who end up paying for the egregious acts, and these people are never held accountable for what they do. And the American taxpayer should be appalled that these people, many of them were only a few years ago still working in the Department of Agriculture, and the Secretaries of Agriculture and the Office of Civil Rights and the Justice Department did nothing to make sure that these people were punished for all the wrongdoing, and taxing the American and burdening the American taxpayer with their wrongdoings.
Now, aren't the black farmers taxpayers?
Yes, they are.
So the money that they were receiving is their money. They put it in there. So what, I'm
Right.
rhetorical question here. But where I want to go with this is, we just hear so often people, like our station here, Arlington Independent Media, and other public cable access stations where we have an opportunity to do programs like this, where you would think that this information would be on the major commercial stations, and us at least getting some kind of idea of what's going on. But we do this because we want people to know what's going on in our world. And it just seems like it just continues to go on and on and on. This is the USDA, which I didn't even ever give any thought to. But when I think of, let's say, the Department of Defense, the IRS, and on and on and on, the corruptness, yes, I said corrupt, and the things that are going to the wrong people and never gets to the right person or people, and people die before it ever gets to them. Do I ask the question, how does that make you feel?
Well, as a black person, I've struggled with the fact that when these things came about, they hurt me personally. And
why does it hurt you personally?
because when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I used to go to Virginia, and my grandmother took us to the theater, and we had to sit in the balcony. I did not know 77 years later that I would be doing the work I'm doing and hearing the kinds of things that I had to sit in the balcony or go to a drive-in theater, because I told my grandmother I refused to go back to that theater. And then I ended up going to a drive-in movie, and they were calling the people in the movie nigger. So I decided, even at that age, 7, 8 years old, I didn't go back there either. But these are some of the kinds of things that maybe I was meant to do what I'm doing, because I don't do it for, the coalition pays me nothing but per diem every once in a while. But I did this because I felt as though it was a calling. In 1963, I was on the mall, and at the March on Washington with my oldest son on my shoulder, who's now 50-some years old. And that left me with something inside of me, but I never thought that I would be in this place and time. Many years later, many acts of working hard for other people, that I would be experiencing and hearing some of the same things I heard in 1963 and when I was only 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. Can you both individually tell us a little bit about the USDA whistleblowers, what that's about?
Well, in the case of whistleblowers, and I think I'm glad to have Ms. Ford here because she can give the full definition of a whistleblower.
Okay.
We see in the area of civil rights, we look at civil rights and human rights jointly. And if you deny a person their civil rights, you're doing something to harm them in terms of their human rights. Because at USDA, the human condition in the environment in some of the workplaces around the country, as well as in Washington, the acts are egregious. So, but I think whistleblowers are anyone that speaks up and says that because we have white Americans in the workplace saying that they're also fed up. But when they report it, just as if African Americans or Hispanics or Native Americans or a person with disability reports something, if a person speaks up, we put them in the category, the coalition does. We look at them as whistleblowers because they're willing to stand up and tell the truth about something that's going on in the workplace. I consider them as whistleblowers, and I consider them some of the heroes because some of these cases that are solved are because people spoke up in support of somebody that had the tenacity and the courage to speak up and file a case in a place like the USDA. And they don't call it the last plantation for nothing.
Where is the last plantation?
The
What are we
last
talking about?
plantation is the culture and the mentality that exists within the Department of Agriculture in their programs and services and the way they treat their employees.
So the relationship around agriculture and plantation is that's connecting the
That's
dots.
connection. That's the
Okay.
connection.
And I just want
No,
just to
go
kind
right
of
ahead.
piggyback on that. We had a case where a supervisor, an African American supervisor, very high up in the Forest Service, of the Forest Service for people that don't know, which is a sub agency of the Department of Agriculture, told an employee was telling him he needed to get back in his place. And he, in response to that, it was a culturally insensitive remark, in his mind as an African American, said, you know, this is not a plantation. No one can put me in my place. And that employee actually ended up filing an EEO complaint, saying that our client that made her feel harassed and that he was invoking race and feelings of racial hostility because he was responding to her comment that he needed to get back in his place. And so, again, when we talk about last plantation, what I know Mr. Lucas is referring to really is this culture at the USDA that I'm shocked case after case, and not all of our clients are African American. We have Asian, Asian American, Hispanic. We have white plaintiffs as well. There is this culture there, and it's as thick as smoke.
Wow.
And it is an anti-employee. It's very pro-management, very anti-union because there is a strong union at the Forest Service. And it's definitely anti-change. We don't want, and this is the kind of the voice of management in the agency, old heads, we don't want all this talk about diversity and inclusion and tolerance. If it's going to make us feel uncomfortable, that's not what we want. And unfortunately, that culture has created a hostile work environment for employees.
As I'm sitting here thinking, wasn't the woman Shirley
Sherrod.
wasn't she with the USDA?
That's correct.
Okay, so can you give us a little update on her? You know about, obviously more than I do, her situation and where she is today.
Well, Shirley Sherrod was, she gave a speech at one of the, I think the NACP was having a conference in rural, someplace in Alabama or Georgia, and what she said was described as being insensitive and racist, and what the reaction was a knee-jerk reaction to a woman who had spent a lot of time working with all types of people.
Right, right.
And she was trying to show that we working together can solve a lot of problems, and not the negative that the U.S. Department of Agriculture or someone took an excerpt, I think Breitbart, somebody sent the tape to.
She was misquoted.
Yeah, she was definitely misquoted. But the point is, what the reaction of the government was to immediately tell her on her way to in rural America, she had to stop her car, and they asked her to resign.
Yeah.
And that's what you call a knee-jerk response, because they don't have that same knee-jerk response when they are trying to penalize a white employee for doing something wrong to a black employee or a Hispanic employee. So it's part of the culture. And I think that what they were thinking was that, okay, now we can show America that we penalize everybody for discrimination, including blacks. But that was wrong in doing so, and she settled her case, from what I gather.
It was very recent.
And got
Very recent.
reimbursed for some of the pain and suffering that she went through.
And I think they offered her the job back after that, or apologized to her after that happened, and she
said no.
She refused.
Right.
Because she knew that she would not have a career in USDA because she took on the system, even though they settle her case like they do many cases in the federal government, but they turn around and reprise against the person. She was smart enough to say that I'm done with USDA. I'm not going to be in a position for you to discriminate against me. And she settled her case and went on to do different things.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the firefighters and what happened or what is happening with them. So give us a little history of that, and then let's find out where you are with it now.
Sure. So my firm represents a class of black firefighters out in Washington State. And again, part of the Forest Service function is to maintain natural forest and wildlands. And so they have wildland firefighters. And a lot of people don't know those fires that happen on the West Coast during a certain season are fought by the Forest Service employees who are trained to be wildland firefighters. And so the lead plaintiff was a crew boss out in Washington State who happened to be African American in a very rural part of Washington. And his vision was to recruit African Americans and other minorities to come into the fire organization of the Forest Service. They are very well compensated. It is one of the only places in the Forest Service where you can get paid overtime. There is also hazard pay. President Obama, they now get full benefits when they're out on the fire line, and they are seasonal. So they only work from around between April and October. That's fire season. And he basically started this program and was bringing these kids in from inner city Seattle, places like Renton and Kent. And in recruiting them and bringing them to the rural areas, they were, integrated with other firefighters, mostly rural kids from the local town there, which is Darrington, Washington. And they were immediately subject to harassment, called black monkeys, niggers, asked very offensive questions. One of the guys, recruits, was from Alabama, and his father was a Forest Service employee. And he came specifically to Washington, to Darrington, to learn how to fight wildland fires, because that's a really strong career if you can get in there. And so some of the his white crewmates were asking him questions like, do you drink grape soda, and do you eat fried chicken? And some of them were asked things like, are you in this for the career, or are you just going to buy rims for your car? Things that just really, and some of the, you can brush some of that stuff off. But there were crew leadership was into that, and they started, once they got wind of it, they were encouraging it. And one crew lead actually went as far as assaulting a black crew member, but when they were out on doing their physical training, they have to run every morning to stay in shape, and literally put his foot out and tripped this kid, a kid from inner city Seattle. While he was out there, he sprained his ankle, and it just became the type of environment that was untenable. For some of them, but they weren't aware of their EEO rights. So we've settled 5 of those cases. The agency, we're in the process now of negotiating the crew boss, and there was also a white plaintiff who witnessed a lot of that. And when he would speak out against it, they targeted him too. So we represent him as well, and we'll see what happens with the last 2 plaintiffs.
I think also important and to show you how the insults in the workplace go, especially in some of those cases. The gentleman that she represents, they had decided the employees were planning to put saline in his water bottle to poison him, and the whole key is it would not have been found out unless one of the other younger employees on the crew had the telephone with all the information in it.
Yeah, there was a text message saying we should just put Visine in the crew boss's water bottle, and it came from 2 white crew members. And when those text messages were exploded, that's when this whole thing just got out of hand.
So let me just backtrack a little bit. Didn't a large crew, was it 19 members of white guys that were fighting the fires on the West Coast, all get, they all died.
In Arizona, I believe.
It was
Yes.
Arizona,
Yeah.
okay. Far enough, West Coast,
Yeah.
but not West Coast. So we're talking about the same USDA firefighters that everybody was feeling some remorse and pain over them dying. But there are Black, Latino. Can we talk about the women, the firefighters that you are also representing? Because, do I say this, when there's someone of a different hue that doesn't quite look like me or you, and they are in pain or in trouble, we're supposed to literally fall down on our knees. I could name surely all those, cases around gun control and the fact that at this school and that school and this place and that place, although as I think, and I'm kind of, rambling a little bit unfortunately, but I'm thinking about Chicago, the weekend of the 4th of July, over 50 people died in that. I don't know if you know that, but 50 people died, murders.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
People were out of control, but no one is saying anything about that. But let 1 or 10 people die in certain places that don't look like you and me, and I'm supposed to cry? I will cry, but excuse me, my pain. Great writer, B.B. Campbell Moore, she wrote, "My blues ain't like your blues," and that to me is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I think, there's a shared sense of humanity that is missing. And, I think when our client started this recruitment program to get these inner city kids in, he just wanted to create jobs. Because everybody wants a job. Just the same kid in the inner city is the same kid in rural America, and they want a chance.
Yes.
That's it. And the sense that I get is that sometimes people feel threatened when people who don't look like them are aiming for those same opportunities, and especially if they're talented and they're good at that job. But this job isn't for you. And it's a shame that that's the culture that we've created by making this whole affirmative action and all of this. All he was wanting to do was to create a pipeline for diversity to come into a very undiverse organization. And fires are getting worse now with the droughts in California and all that. There is a need for who cares if it's my house burning down?
Yeah.
I don't care what color the guy is who's fighting the fire.
Right,
I just want somebody. I don't care where he's from. And I think that
Or the gender.
I think that America can come together on those issues. issues. I just don't think that Americans are aware that this type of harassment is happening in our government organizations, and that our taxpayer dollars are actually paying for this nonsense to go on. Because, you know, when there is an EEO complaint or whatever, if they're paying out money, it's taxpayer money.
Right.
And it shouldn't, nobody should have to choose between wanting a job and being harassed about their race or whatever. Nobody should have to make that choice. And a lot of these young men, I mean, I think the goal was accomplished. A lot of the young men who he was recruiting won't come back. They won't come back to the Forest Service. Half of them were not, would not accept the offer to come back.
So we're getting ready to end. And so what I would like
We're
to
having so
say-
much fun. It's so
I
hard to
know,
end,
I
isn't it?
know. It's always this way with our show. But what I would like to ask is, what, very briefly, do you feel is the resolve on all of this, and where do we go from here?
Well, what I think is that those organizations and those people that have oversight and influence should speak up about the egregious behavior that's going on in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I'm talking about the oversight committees of Congress, such as Judiciary, Appropriations, Agriculture, both Senate and House. They should be speaking up. I think that the American people should get as much information as what your show will be able to give them, and let them know that what goes on at USDA is part of cultural, because they treat white women as abusive as they treat black women or Hispanic women. They tell a white woman to do certain things that they should not. So it's a culture that is embedded in USDA, and this administration should do something to stop it immediately.
Okay, so, you know, I am really pleased that you all, both of you, were able to join us today and to speak about the USDA. I've learned a lot that I was not aware of, but it just makes me feel angry.
Yeah.
But I have to do something with that. I just want to say thank you to Yaida Ford, an attorney that is working with different cases that are dealing with everything from condominiums to firefighting.
That's right.
And Mr. Lawrence Lucas, who is the shadow president and president emeritus with the Coalition of Minority Employees. This has been a very insightful program for me, and I pray that you will join us all again in the very near future. This is Perspectives of Interfaith. My name is Zarina Shakir. God bless.